Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good afternoon. Welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by AJC. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's new digital platform that will enable you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Today's program is brought to you in partnership with Jewish Insider. You can sign up for Jewish Insider's daily kickoff by visiting www.jewishinsider.com. Today is Yom HaShoah, the Day of Holocaust Remembrance. On this solemn occasion, 75 years after the end of World War II, we are honored to be joined by two Holocaust survivors, Halina Peabody and Marion Tersky, as well as U.S. Special Envoy for Holocaust Issues, Cherrie Daniels. After we hear from Special Envoy Daniels and our Holocaust survivor guests, we will take your questions. You may email your questions to questions, that's questions plural, at ajc.org. I'd now like to turn our program over to AJC Director of International Jewish Affairs, Rabbi Andy Baker. Andy, you have the floor.
Thank you, and welcome to all of you. As we all know, this is the 75th anniversary this year of the liberation of Auschwitz and of the end of the Second World War. Even simple arithmetic will tell you that the youngest of Holocaust survivors are today well on in years, in their 80s and older. And so we find ourselves in a really ironic position that the very firsthand witnesses to the Holocaust, those living survivors, are passing away. Even yet at the same time, we know that there are a few 100,000 survivors still living among us around the world, and they themselves are often in not only difficult health conditions, but in financial need. So even as we are undertaking efforts to remind people of the importance of knowing about the Holocaust, educating a new generation about the Holocaust, we're still working to help assist those survivors living among us. In fact, even now, negotiations take place between the Jewish Claims Conference and the government of Germany to provide tangible assistance, to provide home care help to these survivors. And yet at the same time, we see how a new generation, both in the United States and in Europe, knows very, very little about the Holocaust. So today we're going to offer the opportunity of an intergenerational conversation, the opportunity of this new generation in Europe and America to engage directly with living survivors who can bear witness to their own stories. Now, it's been over 20 years since the US Department of State organized an international conference in Washington, a conference focused on Holocaust-era assets. There were so many issues that were still unresolved. Questions of reclaiming property on the part of Holocaust survivors and their heirs. Issues of reviving Jewish communities in Eastern Europe that needed the precious assistance that could come from receiving former Jewish communal properties. The challenges of conveying Holocaust education directly in so many of those countries that had lived for half a century under communism and never were able to look clearly and objectively at their own Holocaust-era histories. That conference, organized by a close friend of the American Jewish Committee for many years, Ambassador Stuart Eisenstadt, brought all of these issues together to develop a sense of need and responsibility on the part of the countries in attendance. But one of the equally successful results of that conference was to create an office at the State Department that would be able to, going forward, focus on this issue and using the American diplomatic reach to press these countries to address these issues of Holocaust education and of restitution. And that work is focused on the US Special Envoy for Holocaust issues. It's a position that has been there since that conference took place. We've had the opportunity to work closely with those envoys. And this past summer, the newest envoy was appointed to this post, Cherrie Daniels. She's new to this position, but she brings with her a distinguished career in foreign service, serving in Scandinavia and Israel, in the Balkan states, and a real commitment to use this office to help in every way possible to press governments, to deal with the unfinished issues of restitution, to be focused on the ongoing concerns of Holocaust education and remembrance. And so to begin this session this afternoon, I'm really delighted to turn to Cherrie Daniels for some opening remarks. Cherrie, please.
Thank you, Rabbi Baker, for the kind introduction and also for the very thorough description of the important 20 years that this office has just marked. Thanks to AJC for inviting me to join what is, for me, a very special Holocaust Days of Remembrance program. It's so vital that we keep ourselves together and in solidarity with survivors in this time. This year's Yom HaShoah observance is particularly meaningful in that 2020 is, of course, the 75th anniversary of the end of the Holocaust, and it marks the anniversary of the liberation of so many Nazi concentration and extermination camps throughout Europe. I'll be marking a number of those in the coming weeks, as I've done so far this year. We gather today and throughout the days of remembrance this week here in Washington and around the world to mourn the 6 million Jews who were killed in the Holocaust, and also the murders the millions who were murdered as a result of Nazi persecution. We also honor survivors of history's darkest hour, as well as the heroes who found the courage to resist Nazi persecution and Nazi oppression, and those who found the courage to try to rescue their friends and neighbors at great risk to their own personal safety. As the number of Holocaust survivors declines, and as you mentioned, there are still some close to 400,000 surviving in the world, as that number declines, there is limited precious time left to hear their eyewitness accounts directly and firsthand. It is truly an honor to be part of this event where we will hear from two of those survivors, Halina Peabody and Marion Tersky, today. It's crucial to me that 75 years after the end of the Holocaust, we honor the victims and survivors by remembering and teaching not only what happened, but why. Why did the Holocaust happen? What could we have done differently as nations, as individuals? As the president declared earlier this week in his presidential proclamation proclaiming the Days of Remembrance, he said, "We must never forget the abhorrent anti-Semitism, racial hatred, and discrimination stoked by the Nazi regime and its accomplices and its enablers that sent countless people to the ghettos, concentration camps, killing fields, and death camps." The coronavirus pandemic unfortunately prevents us from gathering in person during Yom HaShoah this year, but it does not prevent us from remembering and honoring the victims and survivors of the Holocaust and of Nazi persecution, and in standing in solidarity with them. We owe it to each one of them to remember the horrific atrocities committed by the Nazi regime and to teach the lessons of the Holocaust to future generations so that such repugnant acts of evil will never occur again. And may we all have the strength to act in that spirit.
Cherrie, thank you for those opening remarks. We know from recent surveys conducted both here in the United States and in Europe, that even some of the most basic facts of the Holocaust are not known by many people. In fact, it is a particular challenge with the younger generation. A majority of such people, again, here in the US as well as in Europe, are not even able to identify Auschwitz as a Nazi extermination camp. They are not able to identify 6 million as the number of Jews that were murdered in the Holocaust. So I think we are well aware of the challenges we face as that event continues to recede on maintaining and helping to really press people and press a new generation to understand the Holocaust and to learn its lessons. We have here this afternoon an opportunity for a direct conversation between the generations. We have Halina Peabody. Halina herself was born in Krakow. She, with her mother and sister, survived the Holocaust by hiding out, essentially using false papers and remaining in Poland until the end of the war. After liberation, they were able to leave first to the United Kingdom. She left after that for Israel, and in 1968 relocated here in the United States, here now in suburban Washington. And Halina has really dedicated over 17 years of her life as a firsthand witness serving at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Washington and speaking with school kids and others who come to visit. Those of you who've been to this museum know how powerful this exhibition is in telling the story of these fateful 12 years of the Holocaust. But for visitors to that museum, and especially for school kids who come, perhaps the most memorable and searing part of the visit is an opportunity to talk with a living survivor who can tell his or her story. And Halina has really dedicated her life to being one of those witnesses and telling that story. We have had difficulty right now in connecting with Marion Tersky. If the technical situation is corrected, we will have him join us as well. Marian was born in Łódź, Poland. He was deported to Auschwitz with his father and brother, who were murdered there. He survived Auschwitz. He survived the death march that followed. And at the end of the war, was able to be reunited with his mother and remained in Poland. In Warsaw, Marian was a respected journalist. He was a Jewish activist, and he has been part of the revival of Jewish life in Poland today. He serves as a vice chairman of the International Auschwitz Committee, which helps oversee the State Museum at Auschwitz. He is chairman of the advisory board of the Museum of the History of Polish Jews, Polin, a remarkable museum that if anyone has been to Warsaw, surely would see and recognize its value. And as one of the small numbers of survivors at Auschwitz, he spoke movingly as part of the ceremony this year in January in Auschwitz, marking the 75th anniversary of its liberation. Again, I hope we're able to connect with Marian and he can take part in this exchange. Speaking with them, we have really two members of our AJC family. From Los Angeles, Zev Hurwitz. Zev was a college Jewish leader, pioneer, editor of his college newspaper, a Wexner graduate fellow, and well aware and familiar with all of the challenges of being a young Jewish kid on college campuses today. He now serves as the director for AJC's efforts and engagement with college campuses. And joining us from Germany, is Franca Sundar. Franca is one of a legacy now of young Germans who have chosen to spend the year after their graduation from high school as a fellow, as part of the Action Reconciliation Service for Peace, a movement that sends these people to America, to Israel, and elsewhere to work, in this case, with Jewish communities and Jewish organizations. And so Franca has been with us these last months in Washington as a fellow in our AJC office here. But now, like all of us, she's returned home and must only be able to stay connected to us remotely, but we're glad she does, from her family's home in Germany. So at this point, I'd like to turn to Zev and to Franca, at least to begin the conversation with Halina. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Baker, and thank you, Special Envoy Daniels, for your remarks. Halina, I want to echo that it's really special for us to be able to have a conversation with you today on Yom HaShoah, and we're really appreciative of you taking the time to speak with us. We want to start this conversation by talking about your life before the war. Can you tell us a little bit about what your life was like, where you lived, your family, your friends, and we especially want to hear about the Jewish community in your life before the war.
I know this is a problem for me because I was so young. And what I can tell you is I was just a kid. Until 6.5 years old, I was this golden child. I was about to go to kindergarten. I had a wonderful life. My mother used to teach me various things like skating because she was a sportswoman. She was a champion swimmer. But I've very little of my friends. I don't remember much. I know there was very good times I had on the beach. Zaleszczyki was like Ocean City. I don't know whether you're familiar with that. But it was a river which completely, almost completely surrounded my little town of Zaleszczyki. And it was a summer place to come to. So we used to have guests in the summer, and in the winter was very, very cold, so that's why we could skate and ski. Now, my father was a dentist, and he was very much involved with me because I was going to go to kindergarten, just about to enter. So he taught me to read Polish, and I have no memory of when it happened and how, but I've always known how to read Polish. My mother, on the other hand, sat with me and knitted outfits for my Shirley Temple doll. You see, this is what I remember. I had tricycles and bicycles, and life was very, very beautiful. That's very little, I know, but that was my life as far as I remember. I know I had friends, none of whom I met afterwards, so I really can't tell you much more about that part.
Do you remember when things started to change, or when the situation became not as picture perfect as you've described? Do you remember seeing that transition, and what was that like?
Oh yes, I remember that. I remember. Suddenly things changed, and we were told that there was going to be occupier coming into the town. They said that the country was divided into two. The Russians and the Germans made a pact, and we were going to be occupied by the Russians. And my family, which was all in Krakow and Warsaw, would be cut away from us because they were going to be under the German occupation over there. It was very quick. It happened very quickly. We also had a very wonderful event which my mother gave birth to my sister. She was 2 months old when the war broke out, and she had gone to Krakow to be with her mother to give birth. But all that, I remember that she came back to Zaleszczyki, and that's where we were expecting the Russians. because they remembered the Russian occupation in World War I. The men were afraid of to be conscripted into the Russian army, and a lot of people who had the chance ran away to Romania. We had a very friendly border there, and we had a bridge that you could just cross over. So my father, and among other people, decided that it was too dangerous to stay and just left. And he felt that he couldn't take us because my sister was too young. She was just a baby. So that was the first shock that we received. And a lot of people, as I said, left, and we were left on our own, just my mother and my sister and I. And I only know that we stayed in a house. They came and they did a lot of bad things, robberies, and they usually they arrested people that they felt could be leaders. You know, they didn't like competition. But as I said, that was about all that I remember. Very quickly, after they came in, it was September 1, 1939, I'm sorry. And then everything froze over. Before you knew it, the river was completely frozen. You could skate on it. In this case, the people who ran away so quickly and in such panic decided to try to creep back into the families. They thought if he could just slip back quietly over the river and nobody would be any the wiser. And unfortunately, the Russians had sealed the border and they imprisoned everybody. And my father was among them. They accused him of being a spy. The reason being, even though he was a dentist, that he had gone over and tried to come back, so that made him a spy. And they gave him 20 years hard labor and sent him to Arkhangelsk labor camp in Russia. And so we were left. And not only that, because we were family of a criminal, my father, the dentist, we were thrown out of our house. And we were told to go to, excuse me, a town up the road. Was it called Twister? It was another little town. And there was a house there that we were supposed to reside in. And that's where we spent the rest of the occupation by the Russians in that town. Now, after a year, we were able to contact my father somehow. And I know that they exchanged some correspondence, not much, because before they knew it, the Germans decided they were going to take the rest of Poland, and they were coming back. So the Russians just disappeared one night, and we went right back to our homes and settled back in, waiting for the German occupation. So that was one part of my story at that young age.
Halina, you already started to tell us about your experience during the war and the Holocaust. Maybe what would be interesting for our audience to know is what gave you hope in these hard times during the occupation.
Can you go back to being 6.5? I mean, I just hung on to my mother, who was having, to look after my baby sister and me. So I can't give you much of information on that. That's a big question always, but I just followed my mother, and I could just do what I could for her. And I had absolutely no idea what else was doing. I know people were frightened, people were nervous, and everybody was trying to find ways to hide, to run away, but there was no exit. There were no ways to go. So we just existed more or less day in and day out.
How did you manage to go into hiding then after?
That was a long time later. When the Germans came and found us in our in Zaleszczyki, and they started with laws. The law was that, first of all, the Jewish children could not go to school. We had to have yellow stars on our arms. We had also yellow stars on the houses. We had lesser rations than the Poles. And each one of us had to work for the Germans. And my mother, because they knew she was a wonderful knitter, she was told that she would be the chief knitter for the town, for the, what do you call it, the guy who runs the town. The man who runs the town,
Or the mayor?
Yeah, the mayor, sorry. The mayor of the town, and that was her job. And she absolutely did what she was told and looked after us. And as I said, everybody else had to do something that they told you. If there wasn't a job for anybody, they would be made to clean the sidewalks. And it was very frightening. The whole thing, everybody tried to follow and to do what they were told. But there were some scenes that I remember that was very frightening. Like they would catch a rabbi, for instance, with a beard, and would, in front of everybody, would yell and scream, would shave him. And I remember my mother was taking me away for me not to watch it. Very frightening picture that I have there. She tried to obviously not let me see the bad things. And they used to demand a certain group of people in the mornings to come and do certain jobs in the farms. There was a farmland, so they would invite people to come, and you had to have a group that would do certain jobs, and they would take them out in the morning and then bring them back, mostly young people. And this happened a couple of times, and sort of accepted already as that's what was happening. And then they said, well, they needed a large number of people for the next job. They had to cover the young trees with burlap because it was very cold winters, and the trees would die if you didn't cover them with the burlap. And there was up the road, there was an old military camp, and there was all these new trees were there. And that was supposed to be the job. And they needed as many people as they could get, between 600 and 800 people. And this was a small community, because it was most of the young people that walked up the road, and some people even came voluntarily. And as usual, we waited in the evening for them to come back, and nobody was coming back. So therefore, people started to get very, very nervous. And there was nothing to do, nobody to ask, nobody. So we waited all day, all evening, and finally at the end of the evening, somebody managed to get back. One man managed to come out, and he told us what happened. And he said that there was no job for them there. What they found was an open grave with sticks over it. They were told to undress and lay down on those sticks. They were shot, and as they were shot, they dropped in. And this man was one of the last ones. And when they left, he was on top. So, they missed his heart and just, they got his arm. And he managed to scramble out. And he came out and he told us what happened. And at that point, everybody realized that we were in great danger and that we had not much choice. And again, people started talking about, all we had to do was to get over to Romania, but it was all sealed, impossible. And my mother had 2 children, a baby and me. And so she didn't know that there was anything she could do. And in addition to this, see, the community was not that big there. So they decided to throw the rest of the Jewish people out. And they told us to go to the same little place that we were during the Russian occupation, the Tvusta. And it wasn't closed in, but we were told some area that we had to find a place and that we were supposed to stay. So we spent the first moment looking for hiding places. And my mother said to me, listen, this is not going to help us much, because she said they're going to do it again. And again, they started thinking of what can they do? Can they escape? There was no escape, nowhere to go. And they used to have this, every so often they would ask for a group of people for various jobs or going to work in Germany. And so everybody already knew that at that point you had to hide. So sure enough, they demanded a group of people again. This time they said it was for work in Germany, and nobody believed them anymore. And my mother, because we had been in that town before, knew a few farmers. So she put me with one farmer and paid another one in advance to keep my sister or her through the time that they were going to collect people. And the whole day I looked and worried that she was caught. And the lady who had me kept telling me, no, they would catch the people, find the people, put them in the square, and until they had the right number, they would continue looking. And towards the evening, they apparently had the right number. They put them on a train and took them away. And my mother did come out and find me. And then she told me what happened to her. First of all, she said, we're never going to separate again. She said, whatever happens to us, we're going to go together. Because she said that she was forever thinking that I was caught. And she said that we should just keep together. Instead, and again, people started thinking of how could they escape? How could they escape? And there was nothing. And then some friends of ours, I think, they helped my mother. They came to the conclusion that maybe we had a chance, an only chance, by taking on a new identity. We were 3 females, males can be checked, females cannot. And they helped my mother. They took her to a priest and they purchased 3 certificates. And for us as different people, my mother sat me down, taught me my new name, new grandparents, new birth date. And the one thing that they taught me was how to go in and out of church. I knew I had to put my fingers in the water and cross myself going in and out. That was all the information I had to become a Catholic. And we were not religious. I knew I was Jewish. I was going to go to Hebrew school, and I knew how to sign my name in Hebrew, actually. But we were not observant, so I didn't have much to base myself on. However, at that point, all we needed was to try to get out. And they chose a town called Yaroslav for no particular reason, I believe. And they said goodbye to us. We were not yet, that there was a ghetto in Worcester, but not at that time. It was not under lock and key yet. So they took us to the train and said goodbye. So we had a suitcase with some clothing, and the best, they collected a little money for us. And that's how we started a trip on this train. We were going to be on that train with some changes for 4 days and 4 nights. And as we parted from them, said goodbye, we started our trip to Yaroslav. As we started, you know how it is on the train, people start talking and being friendly. And I noticed that there was a young man attached himself to us and started chatting with my mother. And I wasn't paying much attention. But after a while, she told me that he had asked her a lot of questions and pushed her very hard. And that she had no choice but to admit that we were actually Jewish. At which time he said that he is going to the same place we were going to, Yaroslav, and when he delivers us in Yaroslav, he will take us to the Gestapo and hand us over. And we had no choices. We had no way to run away, although he was worried and he always kept one of the kids in his eyesight, which was not necessary because nobody was running. And we stuck together. And that's how we traveled. And as I said, 4 days and 4 nights, you know, you get kind of tired and not thinking much, especially at my age. And then when we started nearing Yaroslav, I sort of woke up, and when we came down on the platform, my mother had explained to me that because she knew the children would not survive, no matter what happened, she had asked him for a favor. She said she gave him everything she had, that is the little money. She even promised coats on her back. And also she gave him the ticket for the suitcase, excuse me. And when they get there, that they should shoot us all very quickly, all 3 of us. She explained to me that it'll be fast and less painful than having to be taken away, because she knew the children would be taken away and the children would not survive. Germans had no place and no need for children. They might have taken her for labor, but she did not want to survive at all without the kids. So that's the deal she made with him. Whether he would have carried it out, I don't know, but that's what she explained to me, because I said I didn't want to die. Well, that was, so as we walking to the Gestapo, she tried one more thing. She asked him if he would let me go, maybe because I could maybe survive by myself, because I had blonde hair and green eyes and didn't look Jewish. And so I said, no, I wouldn't go without her. So we continued to walk to Gestapo. And at one point, she then turned around to him and she said, look, I gave you everything I had. Keep it. Why don't you let us go and try our luck? And he looked at us and she said, look, why do you want us on your conscience? So something happened. That was one of the miracles my mother always had in the worst time. And he turned around and he said, you don't have a chance. But he left us. So there we were on a strange city and with just us. And we didn't know where to turn. We looked around and it was a little cafe. So we walked in there. My mother asked for milk for my sister. And she started asking if there was a place that she could find lodgings. Do you want to stop?
Well, I see that that Marion Tersky has just joined us. Marion, thanks so much for being able to join us. Halina was just telling us a little bit about her experiences at the beginning of the war, and I'm curious to hear from you, Marion, if you would like to tell us a little bit about your experience leading up to the beginning of World War II and the Shoah. If you can tell us a little bit about what your life was like pre-Shoah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Because I am just joined to your phone. I don't see you, but I can hear you.
Okay, we can hear you too. Marion,
Okay.
can you hear us?
So if you want, you can ask me any question you want.
Okay, Marion, will you tell us a little bit about what your life was like before the war? Tell us about your community, your family, your home, your Jewish community.
How many minutes?
Maybe 3 or 4 minutes?
3 minutes, 4 minutes, 2 minutes?
3 minutes is okay.
Okay. Well, it was a Jewish home. My father was a well-known, outstanding, active Zionist. So I was raised in a family where, and it was not typical for a Jewish Polish family, where with my father, I used to speak only Hebrew. With my mother, who didn't speak Hebrew, only Polish. So this is something peculiar for a Polish Jewish family because we didn't use the Yiddish at home. Yiddish I picked up while being in the ghetto afterwards. So before the war, I was raised in a Zionist spirit. I spoke fluently, and I still, Hebrew. Today I've forgotten, but I was very fluent in Hebrew. And I attended also a very prestigious, one of the best, and I'm sorry to say it, one of the most expensive Hebrew high schools in Łódź, Lodge. So my community, my companions, my friends, my milieu was settled in Jewishness, I would say in a progressive, secular, Zionist spirit. So this is in general what I wanted to tell you as far as it was before the war. Well, maybe Sasifi, maybe Daino, and then I'll follow some other questions.
Marion, will you also tell us a little bit about the beginning of the war and kind of how your life Halina shared with us her experience of the transition into wartime. Can you tell us a little bit about how you went from being enrolled in Jewish school and part of this thriving Jewish community into the transition of World War II?
Well, by the way, Alisa promised me that she will the questions write down, because my hearing is not to both. Either my hearing nor my English is perfect, and suppose she promised me to write the questions email the questions. I'm waiting for the question. Could you repeat? So you ask how it was the beginning of the war, yeah?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
what your experience was.
Well, the beginning of the war, of course, it was a shock. It was a shock because nobody expected Poland to be conquered in such a short time. A year later, when it happened to France, to Belgium, to Western Europe, we got used to it. But still, in 1939, nobody expected it. Nobody expected this kind of calamity, of disaster. And then, immediately, because after 8 days, the Germans entered Łódź, and started step by step the discrimination, cutting the birds of the Hasidic Jews, then humiliating, then banning some streets to pass, then banning in the beginning the first car of the streetcar and then totally the streetcars and so on. But this you know from textbooks. So rather, I would try to answer you that still there was a hope that it would last only shortly. Very soon, France and England who joined Poland in the war, that they will do their best. And so it would be only a short time. So a short time we have to suffer. It is also interesting, you know, that in the first months in Łódź, and from this point of view, Łódź was not typical for some other cities in Poland. The main, I would say, attack or the main fire of the Germans was attack to Polish Christians. Well, of course, to Jews, but for them, the Jews were the insects. They were absolutely the enemy whom they would just put into the corner. But because the Poles were the majority, and Łódź itself as a town was incorporated to the old so-called Altreich, to the old Germany, real Germany, they wanted to Germanize Łódź as soon as possible. So they started with sealing the Jews in a ghetto, but in matter of fact, their main fire was against the Poles because they wanted to have room and place and space for the Germans from the Baltic countries, from Moldavia, from Bessarabia, from the Romania, and so on, whom they invited to repatriate to Germany, to make them real Germans, and to settle them in Łódź instead of the Poles and of the Jews. And this is something really a paradox, that those who were supposed to be the first to be annihilated, it means the Jews, in this case, so happened, sometimes it happened in history, they were the last one. So the first ghetto, in matter of fact, we were the second ghetto, whereas the first ghetto was in Piotrków, Persikał, which was 1 week before the Łódź ghetto was sealed. But in matter of fact, a large ghetto, the first large ghetto was in Łódź sealed, totally hermetically, and this is the paradox, that it survived the longest because it was the last ghetto on Polish soil.
Marian, thank you so much for that. I want to bring the conversation back to Halina. Halina, I apologize that we interrupted you in the middle of the story, and I'm hoping that, that you'll be able to finish your story, because we absolutely can't end without hearing the ending to that.
So where was I?
You've gotten off the train. You're walking towards the Gestapo.
Yes, right. And he left us in the middle of the town. Yes. So there we were. My mother was trying to get inside because we knew we were not able to run around the streets. It was wartime, but the Germans were walking around with arms out and, could shoot you on the spot and nobody cared. So we managed to get into a little cafe, and there was a guy there who said he knew of a place where a lady was a washerwoman and she would also take lodgers. So he took us over there, and her sons were very much against having us, because you can imagine what we looked like 4 days and 4 nights with the baby. And anyway, we were just standing there. Oh my gosh. Just a minute.
Call from Helena, Helena.
Okay.
Call from Helena, Helena.
Sorry about that. So we were standing there, and the sons were very much against taking us. But she looked at us and she said, she was a little lady. I'll never forget that look. She looked at us and she said, "Oh no," she said, "it's a mother and 2 children. I have to take her." And she did. And she gave us a bed. That's all we needed. And my mother immediately the next day, she said she'll find a job, because she had no money whatsoever. He took everything. And she went and found little jobs. I went to school as per the Polish children, and learned more about the Catholic religion, because there were 2 hours. 1 hour was for religion, taught by a very nice priest, and the next one was just general. And of course, I knew how to read because of my father, so that helped me a lot. And so I just managed to do the best I could. And my mother was always looking for more security. She had all kinds of ideas. One of them was to go to Germany for work as a Pole. You could do that and it was safer, but they wouldn't take us because my sister was too young. My sister had very curly hair, which was was unknown in Poland unless you were Jewish. So she was very worried about it. There were many things that, worried us. And in the end, she took a lot of guts. She went to the German military camp and asked for a job. And they asked for papers, and we weren't sure at all whether the papers were good. To this day, I don't know. We gave them to the Holocaust Museum, but there were no computers in those days. So we were able to do those things. And in the end, after weeks of worrying that we were going to be shot by now, so she got the job. Her job was peeling potatoes for the troops. But she had the Ausweis, the ID card, and that gave us some help. And we also had some good news. My father was apparently in Palestine with his sister. Now, this letter came through the Red Cross to the people we left behind, and they managed to get that news to us. Of course, we couldn't do anything at that time. So I'm going to shorten this a little bit so that others can talk. But we knew that, so we had this information. My sister was very sick during all this time. My mother was very worried about her. I was fine. I was very good at what I was doing. I was a good actress. And I had friends. We went stealing food if we could, and food was scarce not much going. And we were just very, very careful because we couldn't give ourselves away. So it's only my mother and I who knew who we were. And we had a very close bond always, but this really sealed it. We were waiting. We would know what was happening in the war. We had no newspapers or any kind of, you couldn't listen to the radio. Was immediately they would shoot you for that. So we just had to do day by day. And then one day there was a complete quiet in the streets. We did not know what happened. Usually there were horse and carts going back and forth and quite noisy from 4 o'clock in the morning. Suddenly there was nothing. My mother was wondering if she should still go to work or not. And I was standing by the window by her bed. And suddenly there was a tremendous bang. And there was a bomb that was thrown over a little hut. I call it a hut, not a house. And it broke into pieces and a shrapnel hit my hand. And I started screaming, my hand. My mother grabbed me, grabbed my sister. We walked into the street, empty, completely empty, managed to walk to the hospital where they picked me up and told her that it was dangerous because my hand had a very big open wound and they might have to amputate it because there was no penicillin in those days. But they did save my hand. I just lost a couple of fingers. And they told her that the Russians were coming this time to save us. So she spent the night with me in the hospital. She went back to the apartment we had supposedly, and there was nothing there. Couldn't live there. But unfortunately, sadly, we discovered the lady who took us in was killed. She was under the roof of the kitchen that fell on her. So this was unfortunate, very unfortunate. We could never thank her. The neighbor took us in, and the neighbor said to my mother that was the only thing that she was really upset about was that Hitler didn't finish his job. And that is something, I don't know how she did this because she had some suspicions, I'm sure, about us. But that gave me the idea that, wasn't safe. My mother also told me I cannot say my name in the hospital, my real name, because there were pogroms. And so I had to keep this. It was very, very annoying, I must tell you, that I had to still use the false names, but I did. In the end, my father was located, and my cousin came from Palestine in his British uniform and managed to get us into the Jewish organization that took people out. And we managed to get out of Poland, ended up going to Italy, and very shortly afterwards, when we met up with my father, we found out we could go to England or Palestine, but my parents chose England. So immigrated to England. Now I'll stop there and you can ask me questions.
Helena, unfortunately, we're running very close to the end of the program. Helena and Marion, thank you both very, very much for participating. And I apologize again for the technical difficulties that we had at the beginning of the call. I'm now going to turn the call back over to Rabbi Andy Baker to close us out.
We want to close with a special Kaddish, the prayer for the dead, recited today on Yom HaShoah. Yikadal v'yikadash shmei Rabba, v'yalmad divra kirute v'yamlich malchute. Auschwitz, Łódź, Honar, Babi Yar, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, v'agala v'zman kariv v'yimeru Amen. Majdanek, Birkenau, Kovno, Yanovska, Yehi Shemei Rabba Mivarach Li'olam U'La'olmei Almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpo'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal Shemei Dekucha B'richu. Theresienstadt, Buchenwald, Treblinka, Vilna. Le'elam min kol berchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran bi'alma v'imuru amen. Bergen-Belsen, Mauthausen, Dachau, Minsk, Warsaw. Yehi Shlama Rabba min Shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'maramav v'ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Let God who makes peace in the heavens above bring peace on us, on all of Israel, and let us say amen.
Thank you, Halina and Marion, for your very moving stories. Thanks as well to Special Envoy Daniels. I also want to thank our audience for joining us today for this solemn occasion. Please stay safe and healthy, everyone. Goodbye.